evening. Thank you for coming to our Driftless dialogue at Kickapoo Valley Reserve. My name is Maggie Schultz. I'm the education coordinator here. We have a really exciting presentation tonight on nighttime lighting and light pollution. Our presenter tonight is a lifelong amateur astronomer, a nighttime photographer, and an avid road tripper to places dark and remote. He's been active in the movement to adopt smarter nighttime lighting practices since the late 1990s. He's a former president of the Madison Astronomical Society and a current dark sky international advocate. Please welcome John Rummel.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation to talk tonight. I'm going to start out with a quote. I normally don't do this because I've been told that when you have text like this, you should read it because there are sometimes visually impaired people who have trouble reading. So I'm not going to read much to you, but I will read a couple of quotes from this book. By the way, the book is a recent publication. I just got it a few months ago. Danny Robertson, All Through the Night. She is British. She lives in Wales, and the island of Wales has been undergoing some of its own light pollution struggles. Danny says, every evening around the world, each one of us heads home as the day fades away around us. Every evening, millions of us flick switches that illuminate our lives without giving it a second thought. Our homes burn bright all through the night as electricity runs like rivers along our streets and roads, ensuring the night has nowhere to hide and that we can all walk in artificial daylight, be it 7 in the evening or 1 in the morning, as if the dark is powerless to reach us. Tonight's talk, as Maggie said, is a report card on dark skies. My name is John Rummel, and again, my credentials are kind of slim in this category. I'm not a professional lighting expert. I don't do government, so I don't do approval of lights or disapproval. I am only an amateur astronomer, and I've traveled a lot taking pictures like this. I go to very dark places. I enjoy camping. I enjoy the wilderness. And one of the benefits of places like that is you do find some extremely dark locations with really, really good skies. So I'm going to show you some pictures that I've taken around here, but I want to start with defining terms for what is light pollution. Light pollution is the overuse of light at night, but light pollution is a term that the professionals do not use. Professionals tend to use the term artificial light at night, and they even use that acronym ALAN, or the initialism ALAN. When you're researching something like light levels, it's easier to talk about the fact that it is artificial light that we're talking about. Light pollution can be pejorative. Light pollution can imply judgments that not all people are going to agree on. And so the people who research this topic have found it easier and better to stick with the term artificial light at night. And I will use that, but I will revert back to light pollution now and then too. What are we talking about? There are a lot of different ways to categorize light pollution. Here are 4 that are common: light trespass, overlighting, clutter, and glare. Those are elements that are common to most of our communities. Most of you can probably think of areas near your own home where you have issues of light trespass with a neighbor's light that shines into your bedroom at night, or an especially bright street light or billboard or something like that that intrudes onto your property in a way that you would rather not have that light shedding into your property. Light pollution and the misuse of artificial light at night can really be summarized pretty simply as bad fixtures. We're very bad at designing light fixtures historically, and there's some good reasons for that if you look back to the historical development of the artificial light from Thomas Edison on in the last century. This is a diagram that the International Dark Sky Association, now called Dark Sky International, uses to illustrate the unshielded on the left to the fully shielded on the right. And a lot of people would prefer that you would put one more illustration to the right of that, and that is with the light fixture turned completely off, maybe with a timer, so that our lights are on from sunset until about 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and then they go off during the wee hours of the night when nobody really needs them. We waste a lot of light and a lot of money illuminating places that don't need to be illuminated and spilling light wastefully into the sky. This is a picture that I took at a park near my home in Madison. This is Owen Conservancy Park, and for a park with conservancy in the name, this is a really ironic fixture. There is this parking lot, and you can see the park as it slopes down to the left of the picture there with Madison in the distance. Somebody got the idea that this parking lot needed to be illuminated, and what you can't see on that fixture to the left, because it's just kind of glare bombed out, is a 3-headed LED fixture with the third head, the one that's facing toward where I am, angled up at about 40 degrees because the installer wanted to light the entire parking lot, which extends down to your right. And this is a terrible light fixture. Color temperature is probably about 4,000 degrees, which is a very cool light. So it's very bluish, and it ruins this park for any activities for human beings after dark. I know people used to like to go to this park to look at lunar eclipses or just look at the stars and things like that. And the problem with this light is it pretty much washes out the entire sky. I've spoken to Madison Park's people about this light. They are aware, but they're considering their options. Why does this matter? There are several reasons and several answers to that question. Traffic safety, energy security and climate change, wildlife, and crime. And you'll notice I didn't mention astronomy. My own interest in this topic comes from the world of astronomy, but there are a lot of other reasons why we need to protect the night that don't involve amateur astronomers. All of these things are topics that people care deeply about. All of them have impacts on our lives and our societies that go way beyond lights that are too bright or lights that are left on too long. Underlying all of this also is dollars. Every penny that we spend on lights is a penny that comes from tax dollars often. And we're talking hundreds of millions to billions of dollars spent per year on light that is wastefully spilled upward into the sky, where it doesn't do anybody any good because of poorly designed fixtures, because of poorly designed, poorly placed lights. These are some very good reasons to do something about it. And there are many more that I could have listed here. Another quote by Danny Robertson: "There is no other habitat we have degraded more than our darkness. Of all the ways we have robbed the natural world, nothing even holds a candle in comparison to the damage we have done to darkness." This is a picture that many people start with in conversations about artificial light at night or light pollution. It's a composite photo taken from thousands of different satellite pictures of the United States and then pieced together so that you've got a nice nighttime view of the country with no clouds intervening. This shows you where the lights are. And the interesting thing about this picture that many people pick up on right away is that there's a distinct difference between the right half of the United States and the left half of the United States. It really comes down to population density. The right half is where people are most densely concentrated, not only in the cities, but in the rural areas too, as opposed to the Western US, where you still have cities that are pretty brightly lit, but you have a lot of space in between that just doesn't have the same levels of ambient light. I'm going to switch to another picture of the same thing. This is a composite from satellite instrumentation, not from visible light cameras. So this shows essentially the same thing as the previous slide, but now they've color-coded the intensity levels of the artificial light. And I'm going to get into a little bit about what the color coding means, but I'm going to use diagrams that come from this genre of night sky shots. There are a lot of different resources on the web that have taken the data from those satellites and coalesced it into informational maps like these, using similar color coding. I use a specific one that I'll share with you later, but there are many that you could use, and many people prefer other ones. The color coding stands for the illumination in terms of arc seconds per, magnitudes per square arc second, which is a way of estimating the brightness of the sky at the zenith, directly overhead. I have taken those numbers out and I have substituted my own plain language explanation for what those color codes mean. going from the worst use of artificial light at the bottom, the white is coded for what I call opaque urban skies. Think downtown Chicago, downtown New York City, Los Angeles, or even to a lesser extent, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, any large urban center. As you can see on the map at the right, many of those white splotches are, representative of places like Houston, Atlanta, Miami, and so forth. As you go up the color scale to the reds and oranges, and then eventually to the yellows, the greens, the blues, and the blacks, it gets darker. And so those color codes represent, in my language, moderate urban skies, which is how I would classify Madison. A lot of that map, especially on the right half, is green. You see a lot of green, and that indicates what I would call dark rural skies. You're far enough away from the city centers that you have a satisfying transition to a darker sky, but it gets even better the farther away you get from major cities until you get to what I call star party dark, the amateur astronomer in me talking, until you get to the grays and the blacks, which are totally remote, radically dark skies. We're not going to talk a great deal about those radically dark skies because we're going to focus on the state of Wisconsin tonight, and the state of Wisconsin doesn't have a lot of radically dark skies. When you look at the left-right differential, where is Wisconsin? It's in the right half. It's kind of at the top there. We're going to zoom in and take a closer look at Wisconsin. So here is the state on the map, and I've got the overlay turned off here, and I'll just flip that on, and we can flip back and forth if you want to, taking a look at the artificial light distribution in the state. And you can see immediately that the bulk of the light is focused on the lower right-hand side, the southeastern part of the state, maybe in a triangle that starts in Green Bay, goes down to Madison, over to Milwaukee, and back up. You've got a lot of the whites, reds, oranges, and yellows encompassed in that box. From Lake Michigan, spreads inward between 100 and 130 miles, depending upon where you are. Up north, northern Wisconsin, quite a bit darker, and in western Wisconsin, quite a bit darker. There again is the color coding, and you can see how those color codes work in practice. If you start in downtown Milwaukee, where the sky is almost completely washed out, the further you go west, you gradually transition into the reds, and then the oranges, and then the yellows, and then eventually the greens as you get out far enough away from the city to where you have significantly darker skies. So tonight, I'm gonna start the talk, I guess, of our report card concept by zooming in on the area inside that box, and that's where we are. That box is centered on Lafarge, and that box encompasses a big part of what I've taken to calling the blue blobs in the southwestern part of the state. That is the darkest part of southwestern Wisconsin. So zooming in on that map, again, without the color coding, just the bare map looks like this. The map doesn't do a great job of identifying the townships. For some reason, it does a really good job of identifying the county and state highway numbers, but I'm going to go ahead and just add the dots in there so that you can see where we are in the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, just north of Lafarge, and then you can see the surrounding townships there marked by the red dots. And now I'm going to turn on the overlay and take a closer look at the light signature in this area. And you can see how those, what now, they're not orange or white blobs because we don't have nearly enough population out here to sustain that much artificial light. But with the light pollution signature, the artificial light signature, you can clearly see where the towns are by the blooms on the map. But you also see that satisfyingly blue area surrounding this entire area and encompassing most of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve there to the north of Lafarge. So in this part of Wisconsin, this is a satisfyingly dark area. In fact, for those of us I live in Madison, so I live deep in the orange, light pollution is often thought of in relative terms. If you live in an area like Madison, where the skies are deeply affected. Can't see the Milky Way from my backyard at all. We think of better skies in relative terms. And generally speaking, those of us in Madison, if we move about one color category up that scale, a lot of Madison people are very happy going to yellow areas because yellow areas feel really dark to us. If you live in Lafarge or Reedstown, you're already living in the green. You might take a look at the area that I go from Madison to observe and think, wow, this is brighter than my backyard. And it is. And so those of you who live in a darker area, like the Driftless, like the Kickapoo area, you might be happier going into the blues or even the grays to find those dark skies. So lighting pollution, artificial light levels tend to be a relative experience. We tend to go to some place that's better than where we live for good reason. Now, if you look at the top, you'll see that I'm using data from 2020. And this satellite photo breaks out data by year, going back to about 2016 or before, but they also qualify it by saying that the earliest data is kind of compromised because they were using different cameras, different techniques, different instrumentation in those days. I'm using 2020 data here for a reason, and I'm going to flip in a second from 2020 to 2022 data, and I want you to take a look at what this map representation, how it changes over that 2 years. So take a look at the light blobs representing the cities and the big blue area surrounding us. This is 2020. Here's 2022. It's a pretty significant change in just 2 years. I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to go back to 2020, and I'm going to do it again. And if you look, as I do this a few times, look at any one of the cities. Like right now I'm looking at Viroqua, Westby, and Cashton. Going backwards, you can see how their little blooms expand a little bit, just in 2 years. Growth happens. New construction, maybe a couple of new businesses, all of which come with lights. And in the process of 2 years of growth, you get 2 years of expansion of light too. Look at La Crosse, 2020 and 2022, how La Crosse just creeps out. Look down at Richland Center, same thing, 2020 and 2022. Lights tend to grow as population grows. There are other factors that factor into that too, because we have been changing the light fixtures that we use. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've undergone a revolution in the move away from incandescent lights toward LED lights. And that's had an impact too, some positive and some negative. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But just in the last 2 years, the area around the Kickapoo Reserve has experienced a degradation in the darkness of the night skies. There's a group of people, some of whom are in this audience, who have been working to get recognition for the Kickapoo Reserve from the Dark Sky International Group as a dark sky reserve. And that is a pretty lengthy process. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of paperwork, and takes a lot of documentation of the quality of the skies. And that effort has hit a roadblock in the last year or so because of the factor that we're looking at right here. The degradation of the skies that the satellite is noticing has also been picked up by the people who have been doing the work on the ground here in this area, holding light meters up at night to take actual readings of the brightness of the night sky. And they have seen those light levels increasing in a way that corresponds roughly to what we're looking at here. And so right now, the Kickapoo Valley Reserve's application for dark sky status is kind of on hold as they're studying the problem and working with the people at Dark Sky International to see if there might be a way around this or to see if there's some kind of mitigation strategies that we can use with actual residents, community members, and the municipalities around this area. Another Danny Robertson quote, "We're all born into darkness, molded in it, and it is into the darkness that we will all return. Our formative experience as a living thing is existing in the warm and comforting darkness of our mother's womb. We do not fear the dark then, but from the moment we are pushed into the bright light of day, we learn to fear the dark, to avoid it, to destroy it." A couple of years ago, I was working on a project with John Hazley, who is familiar to many of you from around these parts. John asked me to come down and do some documentation, some picture taking in this area, do some night sky photography. This is a abandoned silo in the Tunnelville Cliffs area, not too far from here, a little south of Lafarge. This was a picture taken at about 8:30 at night. And this was, I believe, in April, 3-4 years ago. So it is fully astronomical darkness. The sun has been down for a couple of hours. But as I look to the west there, Orion is setting in the west. But you can see that there is a kind of an orangish light bloom that I believe is coming from the town of Viroqua, about 10 miles away. And then much closer, much brighter, some local home or business or something has a ton of bright lights on, poorly shielded, and you can see how they're illuminating the underside of those clouds. I'm going to come back and talk about clouds in a bit. So I took a nap this night in April. I woke up at about 3:30 a.m. and I took another picture from this location, this time facing south-southeast as the Milky Way was rising. Now, I did a little bit of post-processing to this picture to make the Milky Way stand out a little bit more, but it's a little bit darker now at 3:30. People have gone to bed. People have turned some of their lights out. You can still see a glow on the horizon. That's probably Viola, about 4 miles from where I am. But that's not a bad representation of the dark skies that you do get in this area if you do some work to get away from the townships. This was taken right here in the Kickapoo Reserve, one of your covered bridges, and this is looking north toward Ontario. I've got a friend inside the bridge with a flashlight. That's what that light is. But you can see the lights of Ontario pretty easily there, about 7 miles away to the north. And then finally, last year, I came down and camped for a night here at KVR. This was in Campsite K, looking south. And again, the Milky Way stands out there, but as you look down toward the horizon, there's a lot of glow down there that's not Milky Way. That is probably Lafarge and just the general, light leak that you get from all of the homes, residences, and other places in this area. So it is dark, but even in a dark place, distant towns or businesses that have parking lots and parking lot lights, those lights make an impact on the horizon. We call them light domes or just illuminated horizons. They're visible to the naked eye faintly, but they're hard to escape if you take a long exposure picture. All of these pictures were about 25 seconds with a decent SLR camera. Let's take a look at Wisconsin again. This time, instead of focusing on the southern part of the state, we're going to focus on the northern part of the state. And even before I put the overlay of the light pollution on there, as you look at the northern part of the state, the whole map has a greenish kind of tint to it, but you can see those darker green areas. That's how most maps these days signify public lands. In this case, mostly state forests, state recreation areas. If we had any national parks would also be shaded green, national forests. Those kinds of public lands are usually shaded green on most maps nowadays. Public land has already been set aside by the government for different uses. In the case of forests, for logging, for one thing, but also to preserve those lands for future logging, the needs of future generations, but also for some recreational benefits. So those areas are restricted in residential growth, residential and commercial building. And so as I switch on the overlay for the artificial light, look how that corresponds to those public areas in the northern part of the state. Now just flip back once and flip it back on. By far, the darkest parts of the state are up in those state forests. And not only do we have the blues up there, but we have some of those grays, which in my categorization was, getting toward radically dark areas. We find a lot of that kind of country in the western United States, and there are a couple of other differences too. In the western United States, generally altitudes are a bit higher, which assists in a clearer dark sky, and less insects in the summer too, which is something that most of us Wisconsinites will take note of. A couple pictures. I've done a lot of traveling in the northern part of the state. This was many years ago, probably the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, from a friend who lived about 15 miles west of Mellon, Wisconsin, in the Chequamegon National Forest. I had his outdoor lights turned on just to give the photo some definition, but you can see in the starry sky above, as low as you can see to the horizon there, although it's broken up by the trees, there is not a hint of a light dome in this area. This is one of the truly radically dark areas in Wisconsin. A few years ago, I also worked on a project in the Apostle Islands, photographing the lighthouses of the Apostle Islands with the Milky Way overhead. This is Raspberry Island. As the crow flies, about 11 miles due north of Bayfield, about 27 miles due north of Ashland. It's a 3-minute exposure. But even with the distance to Bayfield and Ashland to the south, we are looking due south in this picture beyond the light of the Coast Guard light there, where the Milky Way intersects with the ground. You can see the horizon glow of Bayfield and Ashland, even from this far away. So even in a radically dark place like the Apostle Islands, the light pollution glow from the mainland is still a factor. Let's go back to that Tunnelville shot, the silo. This is the common experience of people who live in areas with a lot of population and a lot of artificial light. The clouds on the right are fully illuminated, white clouds. This is a picture I took from Madison, the north side of Madison, on an overcast night. The entire combined glow of Madison is shining up on those clouds, making those clouds appear pretty brightly lit, kind of a distinct yellowish haze, probably because of all the high-pressure sodium lights that are still in operation in a town like Madison. But the common experience of people who live in populated areas is that if there are clouds at night, you can see them because they're illuminated from the light coming below. So I'm going to show a couple of pictures for contrast that were taken from dark areas. These were from my travels out west. This was taken in the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico with the starry sky overhead and clouds in the foreground. And again, you can tell the levels of artificial light by the fact that the clouds in this picture are black. They're darker than the background sky. And this is an experience that people who come from the city and find themselves camping or otherwise overnighting in a dark area, they're unaccustomed to this. It looks like holes in the sky. You really can't see the clouds. You can just see the absence of clouds. The long exposure photo shows that they're clearly clouds, but it shows that they are completely unlit from below. The only artificial light in this picture, you can see on the lower left, there's a camper a couple hundred yards away from me, and inside that camper is what must be a night light. I couldn't see those lights with the naked eye. With a 25-second exposure, they showed up pretty bright, but probably like the equivalent of a candle burning inside that camper. Probably not a candle, probably a nightlight. This was taken from the Beartooth Mountains in Montana. There was a campfire on the next hill over, and that's the 25 seconds worth of exposure that you can see from the campfire. But again, you can see the starry sky above with just a few little patchy clouds that are just completely satisfyingly black clouds. And then this was taken from a location in Nebraska that I go to quite often. It's probably the closest radically dark skies to the state if you head west into Nebraska. And this was a longer exposure, probably on the order of about 2 minutes. You really get some good Milky Way, some good stars there. And again, those drifting clouds, very, very dark clouds. With the exception in the lower left, you can see some glow. The state it's a state recreation area, Merritt Reservoir. There are some residences down there about a mile or two away, and I believe that's just a little bit of light glow from those residences, and you can see a little bit on the underside of the cloud too. But that cloud experience is just so different when you have a radically dark sky. I think this is my last Danny quote where she answers back to Dylan Thomas Where is the rage against the dying of the night? So the report card part of my talk is brief. Again, I don't have any professional credentials to grade how Wisconsin is doing. I just have a lot of my own experiences, and I want to talk a little bit about that. First of all, the maps that I showed you come from instruments that are currently flying on 2 satellites, the VIIRS, Visible Imaging, Infrared Imaging Radiometer Suite. So that is data that's gathered from these satellites. There's actually a guy in Madison. He works for the university, David Lorenz. His job is not monitoring artificial light at night levels. David works for the Center for Climatic Research, and he does a lot of modeling based upon the data from satellites like this. He is an amateur astronomer, and so he realized, with many other people early on, that this satellite data was really good for modeling the visible spectrum of light, artificial light at night. He put together the maps that I use. His website is a bit of a tongue twister down there, but if you Google Dark Sky Finder, David Lorenz, his website will be the first thing that comes up. I really like the way he uses the colors. It makes sense to me, and it's just good to illustrate the kinds of things that we're talking about. Globe at Night is a project that I've been familiar with for a long time, but some of you may not have heard of it. Globe at Night is a citizen science project along the lines of many, many citizen science projects where you can either take your human ingenuity and know-how to work on a project that will somehow benefit a group of scientists who are gathering data. Some of the citizen science projects only use your computer at night when you're not using it to crunch numbers. Globe at Night is a way of assessing the quality of the night skies by teaching people like you and me a constellation, one constellation a year. So just imagine teaching people to use the Big Dipper. Most people can find the Big Dipper. And the project is to go out from where you live, find the Big Dipper, look at the bowl of the Big Dipper, 4 stars, count how many stars you can see inside the bowl of the Big Dipper. Because if you live in Madison, in my backyard, your answer is going to be a lot different than if you live in Reedstown and count the stars in the Big Dipper in your backyard. And so they basically sign up thousands, tens of thousands of people from all around the world, and they do this project and they report their data in 4 or 6 times a year. And they've been doing it since the early 2000s. They've got decades of data now on the quality of the night skies across the regions where their participants have made those reports. Globe at Night has reported out their findings through their website and at top, globeatnight.org. They've reported their findings in several different papers over the past couple of years. This one was in Science. A couple of professional scientists who study the issues of light pollution, artificial light at night, used Globe at Night data. And this was the pull quote, the takeaway. Trends in the data showed that the average night sky got brighter by about 9.6% per year from 2011 to 2022, which is equivalent to doubling the sky brightness every 8 years. It's really bad news, but that's fairly consistent with what other people have found using other data sets. Our artificial light is growing at a rate of about 10% per year. As a nation, how are we doing? These are the 18 states shaded in blue that have some kind of statewide ordinances that govern or regulate the use of artificial outdoor light at night. Now, these might not be great regulations. They might not be the kind of regulations that I would write if I was in charge of this, but they have some regulation on a statewide basis at limiting the use or regulating the use of artificial light at night. Only 18 states, and you can see in the upper Midwest, only Minnesota is represented. The yellow dots represent individual municipalities where an individual town will have additional light ordinances beyond what the state may or may not have. So let's take a closer look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin has 9 municipalities that were found. This was designlights.org. I credit Scott for giving me this link a couple of weeks ago. The 9 in Wisconsin are shown here. Shockingly, Milwaukee. Milwaukee is our worst polluter because Milwaukee is our most populous city, but Milwaukee does have ordinances in place to limit and regulate the use of outdoor lighting at night. There can be, it's possible there are other cities, other townships that have regulations. These are the ones that were found in the research by designlights.org. Those are municipal ordinances. Another category that I'll point, I'll direct your attention to are dark sky parks. This is a program certified by darksky.org. Parks, communities, reserves, other categories. There are 5 categories of dark sky places that the darksky.org people will certify. I chose national or state parks here because Wisconsin only has one currently, and that is Newport State Park on the Door Peninsula. Newport State Park is a great state park. One of the benefits of having this dark sky park designation is that Newport can and is actually required to use this fact in their publications, their PR work. They advertise the fact that they are a dark sky park, and it has a significant impact on their footprint in the minds of potential tourists who are going to travel to the Door Peninsula, travel to a state park, because people are interested in the night sky. And people are interested when they go to places they know are going to be a little bit more remote and a little bit darker in having that experience of seeing a dark night sky. If you go to Newport State Park's webpage, right there on the webpage, it is them crowing about the fact that they are an international dark sky park. There's some other places in Wisconsin that are going for this, currently applying for. The Apostle Islands National Lakeshore is part of the National Park Service. Copper Falls, also in the northern tier of the state, a wonderful park. They are in the process of applying for dark sky park status. And of course, KBR. KBR's application is currently in a bit of a holding pattern, but we're hopeful that they're going to be able to get that moving again and eventually get that status for KBR. By the way, the dark sky designation from the Dark Sky International is not all about being in a remote and dark place. The dark sky communities category bestows this recognition upon cities, townships, and things like that. If you look in the Chicago area, you see several of those yellow dots. There are 2 suburbs of Chicago that currently have dark sky community status. I'm blanking on the names, so I won't try to think of them, but these are both suburbs of Chicago that are about 25 to 30 miles from downtown Chicago, down from the loop. If you can visualize how big the Chicago light bloom is, they're in the thick of a terrible artificial light situation. But Dark Sky International confers that status not on how dark your community is, but on how much of a commitment your community is making to improving the quality of the outdoor lights, adding shields, adding timers to turn them off when they're not needed any longer. In the case of some of those cities, the timers will dim streetlights at 11 p.m. from 100% down to about 40%, things like that. Those 2 communities in the Chicago area are the last place in the world I would ever think to send somebody who's looking for a dark sky experience, but they are working hard to make a difference where they are, and they happen to be in the suburbs of Chicago. I want to talk a little bit, in wrapping up now, just about a friend of mine in Door County. He lives in Sturgeon Bay. His experience is, I think, instructive to how these battles tend to be fought town by town, county by county, and sometimes house by house. So my friend Tom, who lives in Sturgeon Bay, is passionate about night skies. This is the Aurora Health Center in Door County, the local clinic. If you have a doctor or a specialist in Door County, you probably go to an Aurora Health facility. They had those parking lot glare bombs, and they also had building lights to illuminate the lights. So this is the before and after, the front of the building, turning off those glare bombs. You can see the parking lot is still plenty well lit because there are pole lights in the parking lot, now shielded, shining down. There is no need for those glare bombs pointed directly out at nearly a 90-degree angle. So that's the front of the building. The back of the building was illuminated by these spots on the ground shining up to illuminate the facade of the building. This is really common. People, probably the architectural community, likes to show off their architectural accomplishments. But who thinks this is a good idea? Tom managed to get them to turn most of those lights off. There's still a few that are lit, but as you can see again from Tom's picture, the building is still plainly visible. You don't need a light every 30 feet lighting up brick. And incidentally, probably shining most of those photons wastefully up into the sky, because you point a light up, some of it might hit the building incidentally, most of it shines up into the sky. This is the Culvers in Sturgeon Bay before and after, adding shields and selectively just eliminating some of the light pollution problem. The Culvers was a bit of a battle, Tom says, because you're dealing not only with local management, but you're dealing with corporate on a larger scale, but it was a success story. Tom's signal lack of success is an area that many of us are annoyed by, and that is billboards. Billboards are one of the worst offenders, just in terms of the most wasteful example of lighting, with those incredibly bright lights situated on the bottom, attempting to shine up and illuminate the billboard so that drivers can see it, but you can see where most of that light is going. Tom has been in contact with the local owner and renter of the billboard, as well as the national entity that controls the billboards. And it has been one of those experiences where you might get an initial callback or reply to an email, and after the third or fourth email or call, nobody calls back anymore. This is a losing battle. So that's just one battle in Door County. Those battles represent the millions of battles that are taking place every day, every night. Most of them are lost before anybody even realizes that they're fighting them. In my neighborhood, in my domain, I work on the level of neighborhood associations, conglomerates of 50 houses, maybe 100 houses in neighborhoods in Madison, trying to get neighborhood associations to do something about residential life. So this is another quote. This is not from Danny Robertson, though. This comes from another book that I really like, Paul Bogard's The End of Night. This book is about 5 years old. Paul says, when it comes to light pollution, what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. What happens here seeps across the surrounding desert so that national parks in Nevada, California, Utah, and Arizona report that their horizons are aglow, their dark skies tainted. Las Vegas is a particularly bad light dome, I can attest, from hundreds of miles away. Things you can do, things we can all do. There's a long list, but I like to encourage people to start at home. Look at the lights in your own house. Is there anything you can change about your own house? Do you have unshielded lights on your garage or on your front porch? If you're like about 95% of Americans, you do have unshielded lights. In many cases, you don't even have to buy a whole fixture, which will cost you maybe $90 to $150 a piece. You can have shields retrofitted to go on your light fixtures and make sure that they're only illuminating the ground. Talk to your landlord, talk to a neighbor. Use motion detectors on your own lights so that they're only on when they need to be on, or timers so that they go off after they're not needed anymore. Join your local astronomy club or join the Friends of the KVR. There are a lot of things that you can do. This is some information that Dark Sky International shares. Really easy 5 points about lighting. Make it useful, make it targeted, make it low level, make it controlled, and pay attention to the color. And they have explanations there. Other things that you can do: speak at a public hearing, provide phone feedback to a lawmaker, fill out a web form, or register a concern. And I always tell people that clicking like on a Facebook page isn't enough. And in closing, why does this matter? Some of us become targets for ridicule because we use a word like disaster, and people think that we're misusing the word disaster. Is this really a disaster for darkness? Come on. Disaster implies something much more, a matter of life and death. We're just talking about garage lights, parking lot lights. Is it really a disaster? And I believe this comes from Danny Robertson too, can point people to the word disaster. Etymologically, disaster comes from two Greek roots, dis meaning to negate, and the Latin word for star. Disaster literally means a lack of stars. So it's not an overstatement if you refer them to the etymology of the word. So I'll leave you again with my picture from KVR from last year. We can make a difference, but it really does start on the local level. It starts with people like us. Thank you.